right? So the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to read the passage until I stumble across a question. When I stumble across a question, I'm going to tell you what type of question it is and how to solve it, right? So 60 miles north of Guam and more than 1,700 feet under the ocean surface is the summit of NW Rota 1, an undersea volcano discovered in 2003. Surprisingly, the volcano appears to have been continuously active. It even grew 130 feet in height between 2006 and 2009. Yet, despite the hostile environment created by the constant volcanic activity, life is thriving there. Special adaptations are key to survival. At that depth, water pressure suppresses the explosive force of the volcano's eruptions, allowing scientists to watch and observe them close via remotely operated vehicles, right? So question number one is asking us to revise this underlined portion. And what I noticed straight off the bat is a lot of these grammar questions, by the way, do not have a question. You just have to see which change makes the most sense, right? And as I'm looking here, at that depth, water pressure suppresses the explosive force of the volcano's eruptions, allowing scientists to watch and observe. Well, if you think about this, watch and observe are kind of synonyms. They mean the same thing. If I watch something, that means that's the same thing as saying I'm observing something, right? So here we're dealing with a concision question. And we could see this because the choices are all kind of going to have synonyms of that underlined section. Notice how visually kind of means to observe, and how watch matches up with this watch right here. Notice how observe and see. These are all synonyms of watch, right? And the answer is always going to be the shortest choice that preserves the meaning, right? The meaning of the sentence is that scientists watch the eruptions up close, right? We don't need to say watch and observe. We don't need to say visually watch. We don't need to see observe to see, because they all mean the same thing, right? If you watch something, it's visual. If you observe something, you're seeing it, right? So choose, you get rid of the observe, stick with the watch, stick with the most concise choice. This is a concision question. All right, moving on to number two. It says, to make the paragraph most logical, sentence 5 should be placed where? Well, with these questions, here it gives you a marker, and this is like the sentence number, and it's going to tell you which one of these sentences you should move somewhere, right? So sentence 5 can be located right here by this 5. It says that at that depth, comma, water pressure suppresses the explosive force of the volcano's eruptions, allowing scientists to watch and observe them close up via remotely operated vehicles, right? So where should I move this sentence, right? So choice A says where it is now. Well, if we look at this question, right, it starts off with at that depth, right? So let's just read the sentence preceding it, right? Yet, despite the hostile environment created by the constant volcanic activity, life is thriving here. Special adaptations are key to survival. At that depth, water pressure suppresses the explosive force, blah blah blah. Here it's saying that at that depth, but really there's no mention of any depth before that sentence, and that kind of makes me suspicious that this isn't the best place for the sentence to be. Remember that in a paragraph, sentences are always related. So the sentence after another sentence should relate back to that previous sentence. So if we're talking about at that depth, the sentence before this one should probably talk about depth. And that's why choice B is going to be your correct answer, right? Because after sentence one, well, let's read sentence one. It says that 60 miles north of Guam and more than 1,700 feet under the ocean surface is the summit of NW Rota 1. Well, right here, we're talking about 1,700 feet under the ocean surface, which is depth. And sentence 5 is talking about, well, depth, right? So because our sentences have to relate to the sentence before them, if at this one we're talking about depth, that means that sentence 5 should actually go after sentence 1, right? And let's just read how that would sound. 60 miles north of Guam and more than 1,700 feet under the ocean surface is the summit of NW Rota 1, an undersea volcano discovered in 2003. At that depth, water pressure suppresses the explosive force of the volcanoes, allowing scientists to blah, 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 right? So it makes sense because here we're talking about depth and here we're talking about depth. They should be together. All right. Next is going to ask us to revise this underlined portion right here. So NW Rota 1 is far below the ocean's photic zone, where sunlight drives photosynthesis. Nevertheless, bacteria supporting a unique food web have adapted to this perpetually dark environment, right? So here it's asking us to change this word, which introduces a brand new sentence, right? And I think that the answer here should be no change, right? Because if we think about this, nevertheless, uh, nevertheless is a contrast word, right? So nevertheless is the same thing as saying however, despite, even though, right? So if we really think about the meaning of these two sentences, right? NW Rota is far below the sun's photic zone, where sunlight drives photosynthesis. So we're so far down deep in the water that photosynthesis cannot happen, right? And most things get their energy from photosynthesis. And here we're saying that bacteria supporting a nuke food web have adapted to this dark environment. So even though there's no light, even though we're so deep that there's no sunlight, somehow life has moved on, right? And if you think about it, even though kind of means like despite, right? So despite there being no sunlight, there is still life there. Nevertheless, like there's no sunlight that deep down in the ocean. However, bacteria have evolved to live there. Or nevertheless, bacteria have evolved to live there, right? So this is contrast. Here it's saying that there's no photosynthesis, but here we're contrasting that by saying that even though there's no photosynthesis, bacteria still live and life still moves on, right? None of these other connectors would really make sense. Similarly, would be super wrong because here we're saying that they need photosynthesis, but here we're saying that bacteria don't need it. Furthermore, is if we're listing something, that really wouldn't make sense. And afterward, like what are we doing after? Nothing, right? So nevertheless is correct because it's contrasting, right? Here we're saying that there's no photosynthesis, so life should be hard to exist, and here we're saying nevertheless life exists. Right. So here it says the bacteria have evolved to use hydrogen sulfide instead of sunlight for the energy that drives their metabolic processes. And hydrothermal venting is the source of the chemical soup necessary to support him or her. Right. So here, this him or her has to relate to something in the sentence, right? And if we read the sentence, we know that this him or her relates to the bacteria, right? So the bacteria have evolved to use hydrogen sulfide rather than sunlight for food. And this vent is necessary to support the bacteria, right? So him or her is really referring to the bacteria, right? But at the same time, there is an issue here. And that's because him or her is singular, right? And bacteria is plural, right? So remember that everything has to agree in number. So if something is so if you're saying if your subject is plural, any pronouns referring to that subject also have to be plural, right? So if him or her is singular, the plural of him or her is them, right? So bacteria is many. Bacterium is one, but bacteria is many. So we have to use them because them is plural. And one is wrong and it is wrong because those are all singular, right? We need something plural. Number 5, let's continue reading. It says that seawater seeping into fissures in the ocean floor is heated by underlying magma, and the heat drives chemical reactions that remove oxygen, sulfites, and remove other chemicals from the water, right? So automatically we can see that this is a parallel issue, right? We're looking at a list, right? And there is something wrong with this list, right? We see that seawater seeping into fissures in the ocean floor is heated by magma, and the heat drives chemical reactions that remove this, and this, right? So here, this is a list of what we're removing, right? X removes A, B, and C. We don't need this remove here, right? Because this is simply a list. This should just be a list of the things that we remove, right? So there shouldn't be a verb here because we already have a verb here, right? So the correct answer has to be D, right? So the chemical reactions remove oxygen, sulfates, and other chemicals from the water, right? The only time where you would need a verb in a list if you're like listing the actions that someone does. So like for example, Susie washes the floors, cleans the dishes, cooks the food, right? Meanwhile, Susie shops for eggs, milk, and bacon, right? So we already have this one verb here. So our list is just the things that the verb is verbing, right? Or the action is acting on, right? So here our list should only be the things that we are removing. If we are removing other chemicals, it doesn't make sense. So just eliminate that, right? So we're going to continue reading. Once superheated water rises through the vents in the ocean floor, additional reactions cause minerals and compounds to precipitate onto the seafloor where bacteria feed upon them. Loihi shrimp, originally thought to only exist around undersea volcanoes near Hawaii, survive by using tiny shear-like claws to harvest rapidly growing bacterial filaments covering rocks near NW1 Rhoda's hydrothermal vents. Right. So here, number 6, I think this is one of the easiest questions on the test. If your test has a bunch of these questions, you are blessed. It's asking us what to do with this punctuation here, right? So it's saying that we should make it a semicolon, that we should remove it, or that we should make it a dash, right? Well, if we look at it here, we have a dash right here, and we need to pair that dash up with another dash, right? So the answer choice here is C. Remember that the way a dash works is a dash can never connect a fragment to a sentence, right? Right? It can never connect a fragment to a sentence. A dash can only connect a sentence to a fragment, or a sentence to a sentence. Right? I don't know why it's this way. This is just one of the stupidest rules of English, but you cannot have a fragment and a sentence, right? Sorry, you cannot have a fragment connected to a sentence by a singular dash, right? Um, you need to have another dash on the other side, and then this pair of dashes creates like the stupid little apposition, and that would make it correct, right? So because we have this dash alone right here, and because lohi shrimp clearly isn't a sentence, this is a fragment, we need another dash right here so that this dash isn't connecting a fragment to a sentence, it's just setting aside another fragment, right? So just setting aside this whole thing instead of connecting a fragment to a sentence. That's it, right? So just pair up the dash. If you have a dash here and a dash here, this dash is no longer connecting a fragment to a sentence. It's now setting aside that phrase. So number 7 says, which choice most effectively sets up the information in the next sentence, right? So let's continue reading. Shears, so they use shears to harvest whatever, right? So the lohi shrimp spend most of their time grazing on the bacteria and evading another previously unknown species of shrimp. Shrimp of that species also graze on bacterial filaments as juveniles, resulting from their ability to cope with the noxious environment around the volcano, right? They feed on the lohi shrimp and other organisms that are overcome with the toxic plume of volcanic gas and ash. So what we're trying to see here is which of the following sets up that example, right? So which sentence right here would best transition into this, right? So here we're saying that the lohi shrimp spend most of their time grazing on bacteria and evading other species of shrimp, right? So they evade other species of shrimp. Now, shrimp of that species, so the shrimp that lohi, the predators of lohi, right? So lohi, avoid shrimp A. That's what that's saying. So lohi, avoid shrimp A, right? And then the next sentence is saying shrimp A, right, graze on bacterial filaments as juveniles, right? So they eat bacteria as kids, pretty much. And then, if we just ignore this sentence number 7, we're saying that they feed on loihi shrimp and other organisms that are overcome by toxic plume of volcanic gas and ash, right? So, if shrimp A has to eat loihi shrimp, right? Rather, that's what this sentence is saying. So here we have an unknown sentence, and then here it's saying that shrimp A, once again, eat loihi shrimp, right? So, our connecting sentence should probably have to do with something that says that like shrimp A eats loihi shrimp as they're older, right? So that's choice D, right? Think about it. Um, Shrimp of that species graze on bacterial filaments as juveniles, but as adults, their claws are large enough for the shrimps to become predators. When they're predators, they feed on loihi shrimp and other organisms that are overcome by toxic plumes of volcanic ash, gas and ash, right? So here we're talking about when they're juvenile. So to make this logical, we have to talk about how they are adults, right? And when they're adults, their claws are big enough so that they can be predators. And when they're predators, when they can actually predate because their claws are large enough, when they are predators, they feed on the shrimp and they feed on other organisms that have been like knocked out or that have been sick because of the volcanic gas and ash. That's what that's saying. So this whole thing is talking about how they are predators and how they grow up to be predators, right? So thriving in an unusual ecosystem, or choice C, wouldn't really make sense here, right? Because we're trying to talk about how they feed on loihi shrimp and other organisms. We're trying to see how they are predators. This is the only thing that supports um, that notion, right? And right here, um, choice no change really doesn't make sense because once again we're trying to talk about how they are predators. Resulting from their ability to cope with the noxious environment around the volcano has nothing to do with why they graze on bacterial filaments as juveniles and why later on in their life they feed on low-high shrimp, right? And their adaptations are not yet fully understood by the scientific community. We never, ever, ever, ever talk about adaptations until the next paragraph, right? So here, next paragraph, it says that during an underwater eruption, steam quickly condenses. The steam leaves only carbon dioxide bubbles and droplets of molten sulfur. So we're trying to see which choice effectively combines the sentences, right? Now, whenever you see effectively combines the sentences, we're going to be looking at the shortest answer. Shortest answer that's grammatically correct. Or that grammar allows. Right? So this means that we need to be able to combine these sentences with the least amount of words in a way that still is legal by grammar, right? So we're going to look at our choices from smallest to largest. So A is the smallest choice, and it says that during an underwater eruption, the steam quickly condenses and leaves only carbon dioxide bubbles and droplets of molten sulfur. This works, right? This works. If we just put an and there, right? The steam quickly condenses and leaves. We're describing what the steam does. The steam can condense, and the steam can also leave droplets of bubbles. Perfect. That makes sense. It's short, which means it's a good candidate, and it's also grammatically correct. All of these other constructions are longer than this. They may all be grammatically correct, but because they are longer than this choice, they're automatically wrong, right? Because they're clunky. They're also like clunky, right? So, moving on to number 9, it says that this means that the water near NW Rota 1 is more acidic than that of stomach acid, right? So here we're dealing with a comparison question, right? So A is more than B. I am better at math than Daniel is. We're just dealing with comparisons here. So here we're comparing that the water, the acidity of the water, right? So the water near NW1 is more acidic than what? Well, than that of stomach acid. That kind of is a bit clunky, no? You can say that it's just more acidic than stomach acid. The water near Rota, or the acidity of the water is more acidic than stomach acid. It makes sense, right? All these other choices really don't make sense. The water near NW Rota is more acidic than those of stomach acid. That doesn't make sense because those is plural and here water is just singular, right? This means that the water from NW Rota 1 is more acidic than the acid from stomach acid. Well, than the acid from stomach acid. You're saying two acids in one choice. That kind of is clunky and doesn't make sense. And finally, then that of stomach acid can literally just be shortened to stomach acid, right? So the water near NW Rota is more acidic than stomach acid. Concision question mixed with a comparison question. That's all you need to know here, right? So, and that presents yet another challenge to life forms living nearby. As the carbon dioxide level in the Earth's atmosphere rises, the world's oceans observe more carbon dioxide, right? So whenever we have this apostrophe, it means possessions, right? So let's just look here. So as the carbon dioxide level in the Earth's atmosphere rises, right? So notice here, the Earth's atmosphere. So whose atmosphere? It's the Earth's atmosphere. The Earth owns this atmosphere. This atmosphere belongs to the Earth. Okay? And we know that because of this apostrophe S. So let's look at it here. The world's oceans. This means whenever you have an S and then an apostrophe, it's plural, right? So here we have fox. So the fox's hat, right? So this hat belongs to only one fox, but here the fox's apostrophe home. This means that there's multiple foxes. Whenever you have a plural that has that ends with an S and you want to make that possessive, you just add the apostrophe on the outside. You don't need to add another S. You just add an apostrophe on its own, right? So the fox apostrophe S hat means that one fox owns that hat, but the fox's apostrophe or fox S apostrophe means that there are multiple foxes. And the home belongs to those multiple foxes, right? So here it's saying that the world's, right, S apostrophe. This means that there's multiple worlds. What worlds are we talking about? We live in one world. Get with it, right? So there's just one world. So if the ocean belongs to the world and there's only one world, then there should be world apostrophe S, right? So here we can eliminate no change because this is innately wrong, right? So we know that the world's oceans is, well, this doesn't make sense because the world's is correct. It's singular. There's only one world. And what belongs to it, an ocean belongs to. Oceans belongs to it, right? But here's the thing. The ocean belongs to the world. And yet here we have an apostrophe S. So what belongs to the oceans? Well, let's just read for it. The world's oceans observe more carbon dioxide. So it's clear to me that nothing really belongs to this ocean. So it shouldn't have an apostrophe. It should just be oceans, which is choice C, right? So I know that was a lot of apostrophe talk, and I hope you understood it. But if you didn't, let me just go over it one more time, right? So there's only one world that we're dealing with, right, in this passage, and that's our current world, right? This S apostrophe means that there are multiple worlds. there's only one world that we need to deal with, right? So because there's only one world, we will get rid of this S, or rather we will just put this apostrophe between this D and this S, right? So here we're dealing with WORLD apostrophe S, worlds. So in this world has oceans, right? Oceans belongs to this world. There's nothing else that belongs to the oceans. Oceans aren't possessing anything. They are absorbing more carbon dioxide, right? They're doing something. They're not owning something. So it's useless to have this apostrophe here. So really what this means is the world. That is the correct choice. And how that reads is as the carbon dioxide levels in the Earth's atmosphere, or as the carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere of the Earth rises, the oceans of the world absorb more carbon dioxide, right? So just know how apostrophes work and know when and when not to use them. Finally, the last question of this passage. So they absorb more carbon dioxide. And here it says that the writer is considering revising and underlining the portion to the following, right? So dioxide, which increases their acidity. So here we're actually adding an extra detail that this causes an increase in the acidity. And it's asking us, should we do this or should we not do this? Well, personally and objectively, rather not personally, but objectively, I think that yes, right? Because if we just read the sentence, NW1 rota is more acidic than that of stomach acid, presenting yet another challenge to life forms living nearby. As the carbon dioxide level in the Earth's atmosphere the world's oceans observe more carbon dioxide. This sentence really doesn't add anything to this paragraph, right? Duh. Obviously, if the carbon in the atmosphere rises, it's going to go into the water. Why is this significant, right? Why and how does this relate back to the passage, right? Why should I care about this sentence? And here, what choice 11, what this thing is saying is, well, you should care because it increases their acidity. Guess what we were talking about in the previous sentence. In the previous sentence, we were talking about how the water is more acidic than stomach acid. And here, we should still be on the topic of stomach acid, right? So this is relevant. This is 100% relevant to the topic because we were just talking about the acidity of the water. We were just talking about the acidity of the water. So the next sentence should talk about the acidity of the water if it's not talking about anything else. All right? So we can eliminate choice C and D because they both say no, right? It doesn't repeat information in the passage because tell me where in the passage it ever said that because carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere increase, the CO2 levels the acidity of the ocean also increases, right? Where, right? Or you could be like, oh, but here in this sentence it says the steam. It's talking about the steam, and it's talking about molten sulfur. It's talking about how the steam leaves CO2 and molten sulfur, right? It's talking nothing about the CO2 level in the Earth's atmosphere. It is only talking about the steam from the underwater eruption, right? It's talking about the steam, not the carbon CO2 level in the Earth's atmosphere, right? And D, it says no because it interrupts the discussion of oceanic life forms. We are not talking about oceanic life forms until like all the way down here, right? This is interrupting absolutely nothing. We were talking about the acidity of the ocean here. So it actually is on topic, right? So now we're choosing between A and B. So it's either yes, because it explains the relevance of the sentence to the point made in the paragraph, or we should keep it because it helps the reader understand why organisms near NW1 rota evolved the way they did. This paragraph is telling us nothing about how or why the organisms evolved the way they are. Just because the CO2 level in the atmosphere rises, this tells us absolutely nothing about why the critters are so unique, right? We're not talking about evolution in this paragraph whatsoever, so it's false. And that leaves us with choice choice letter A. It says yes because it explains the relevance of the sentence to the point made in the paragraph. That's the correct answer. What can I say, really? Literally, it's relevant, right? Here we're talking about the acidity of the water, and here it's literally telling us, oh yeah, by the way, this thing causes the water to be more acidic, which by the way is something that we were talking about before. So that's an entire passage went over.